Hello, everyone, and welcome to Tech Field Day. My name is Tom Hollingsworth, and we're here on site at HPE Discover and Aruba Atmosphere 2024. They're both co-located this year for the first time, and we just finished up a day of great presentations from our friends at HPE Aruba Networking, and we wanted to spend a little time with our delegates here for Networking Field Day Exclusive, discussing some of the announcements and some of the technologies that we learned about, and get their perspectives and opinions on things, because that's what we do here at Field Day. We're all about perspectives and opinions of the practitioners out there in the community. So I want to go ahead and kind of open the floor up. We had three great presentations around some of Aruba's hottest technologies, but the one I think that kind of created a lot of discussion was the last presentation we got, which was over Aruba Central. Now, for those of you who may not remember, last year at Atmosphere 2023, we got a special sneak preview of the UI enhancements that were going to be made to Aruba Central. And it was a big deal. They're redesigning it for the first time in a very long time. And a year later, in case you missed the news, we're kind of in the middle of the AI mania, and everything has to be AI integrated now. There has to be AI included in whatever we're doing. And there was some AI that was included in Aruba Central. I'm just glad they didn't rename it AI Central or something like that. But I just want to kind of open the floor up to our delegates to kind of talk a little bit about what did you see in that presentation that made you excited, gave you hope, or maybe had some questions. I mean, Keith, you kind of started this whenever we got in here. What are you thinking?
Well, the thing that impressed me was their being so forthright and shared information from their literally billion clients worth of data in Central. And some shocking news came out of that. Shocking in the sense that I think everyone needs to listen to this and see whether or not it affects you in your wireless LAN. One was, here, I'll just bring it up so I don't make a mistake, that only 15% of their Central clients who have purchased 6 gig capable APs have turned on 6 gig.
That's turned on at the AP level, not clients associated, just turned it on.
To turn on the ability for 6 gig radios. So they purchased a 6 gig AP and then never turned on the 6 gig radio. Now, it could be a mistake in that it's not on by default, and
that's what I heard.
Or they kept their old config and they just transferred it over. But 85% not using what they paid for, that's kind of shocking.
That's crazy. That's what I heard. It seemed like he was describing it like it was a default setting and the people just hadn't enabled it because either they don't think they have capable clients or they haven't even thought about it. Like their biggest concern was just doing a one-for-one replacement or whatever they did to get to that model of AP.
A slightly faster horse that eats a little less hay and has a bigger number.
Yeah, and like it can do more, but they haven't like checked the radio button.
Maybe they're concerned they did a one-to-one replacement and they don't know if the 6 gig coverage is going to work.
Who knows? That's a lot of customers not getting what they're paying, not taking advantage of what they paid for. Yeah. They've got what they paid for, they're just not using it.
There's a little more complexity to just turning on the switch, though, for 6 gigahertz. I think there's a whole security discussion and policy framework that needs to take place in parallel to that. Deciding what you're going to do with WPA3, if you're going to turn on transition mode, you're going to have separate SSID names, that kind of thing.
There was the whole power thing. That probably had a lot of people just go, we're just going to wait until the power thing gets straightened out.
Mm-hmm. They did also give a stat, and this wasn't for 6 gigahertz. This was across the board, all million plus APs that they're watching. Only 15% today are using WPA3. That's also shockingly small. And because we've had WPA3 for a long time. And yes, there's issues, but we've been talking about this for years.
Mark, you had something?
I have a school district that bought 60 APs. They installed them a year ago. We had this conference that is happening today and tomorrow, and they turned them on last year and they had problems on the Wi-Fi. I'm guaranteeing almost all of those clients were not on the 6 gigahertz network, but they thought that was what caused the problem, so they turned off 6 gigahertz for the last year. And so a month ago, we finally turned those 6 gigahertz on. We're in preparation for this conference, but I think that's kind of this mentality that a lot of people have. They're like, oh, I turned 6 gigahertz on, it's going to affect my other stuff. No, it's a different band, and a lot of people don't understand that.
Yeah, like Troy said, there are SSID issues, security issues.
Yeah.
I think also you do see this a lot, and I think I wonder if people buying 6 gigahertz APs now would be more likely to turn on some of these features, whereas the people who've probably already got them are fairly early adopters, I would say, and the best one in the world, and I think this goes across all vendors, so not just a HP issue, is that generally when you buy APs early, often the new stuff doesn't work and you have to wait for a few revisions. So if you've had that experience, just like Mark was suggesting, where you've turned on all this new stuff, it makes your network horrible. You turn off all that stuff, and then now everything's working. Do I ever get around to then turning it on again because of that first experience? I've definitely had that with some customers of mine.
Yeah. So I think when you look at that, though, right? I mean, they're touting all the information that's available, right? So is there not an opportunity to say something like flag, hey, I see you've installed a Wi-Fi 6 access point, right? Maybe you should turn on these features, right? And then like lead you to a sort of a workflow that's like, oh, you also don't have, WPA3 enabled, right? Like it seems like they could lead you down a workflow that would help you configure it, establish it, like actually turn it on and make use of it potentially.
And I think this is one of the problems that we face in IT a lot, is there's a lot of advanced technology out there that we'd love to use that's not enabled by default, or that should be enabled by default but isn't. My favorite one is S3 buckets on Amazon Web Services being wide open to the world for absolutely no reason whatsoever. And Amazon was like, this is fine, until like enough people in the security community were like, no, you need to lock them down by default and make people open them up on purpose, and that protects everybody. But we have intelligence built into Central. We have the remnants of what was Raza networks that can collect statistics and tell you like, hey, X number of users have turned on this feature and it has not impacted performance, or it has increased performance, or it has increased security. Should Central be configured in such a way as to provide pop-ups, like Sean was saying? Hey, we've noticed that you've installed this model of AP, but you haven't enabled all the radios on it yet. Would you like to step through a configuration guide? And to your point about security, let's turn on those radios, but not configure an SSID on them yet until we can verify that they're not going to create interference, or that the arrangement plan is sufficient to provide coverage for where we need it. And only then will we walk you through the process. Like, these are the kinds of things to me that AI should be doing. We noticed that you did something dumb or didn't do something smart. Would you like me to help you do that so that you don't have to put a whole lot of extra brain power into it? Or am I giving AI too much credit at this point?
I think that's my worry, is are you giving AI too much credit? Because, as I say, if the reason they're not on is actually because I've chose to turn them off, because when I had them on, it didn't work. Now, you may since have fixed it. I remember we went through this with some early AX APs with a customer. We had to turn off all AX features, and it's because they were doing effectively the sounding too much. It was a bug, but they were literally using up all the airtime with sounding. So we turned off, we made them just good at AC APs. We turned off all the AX features, and it fixed the problem. Now, if the system now says, oh, you need to turn this on, do I have confidence to trust it at that point? Even how do I know when?
But at the same time, if the system knows that you disabled it on purpose and you gave like a reason code for it, and I know it's Windows Server 2003 shutdown dialog again. By the way, I believe the most popular reason to shut down a Windows 2003 server was ASDF JKL semicolon ASDF, because I just want to get the stupid dialog box off the screen. But like, that would be another good point for Aruba, HP Aruba Networking, to come back and say, we have noticed that a large percentage of our users have explicitly disabled this feature. We need to investigate, is it a bug? Were they directed to do so by our technical center? Is it something that we need to work with to enable? Because we talked a lot about the fact that there is a significant amount of data that is available in Central. We need to do something with it. And that was like the theme of the keynote from Antonio Neri, was the data has been here forever. We've just not known how to unlock it yet and how to do things with it. So should platforms like Central bubble that data back up to Aruba and say, here's what we're seeing. it's not what you would either prefer or what you'd like to add to your marketing slicks. How do we fix this?
I think, though, to some extent, that's what they were saying they're doing. They're recommending you should enable, 6 gigahertz. You should, and I thought that was good. But one of the things I mentioned to them is, and I keep coming back to turning things off, but I'd like them to also say when not to have something on. Because the amount of times that the example I gave where I've disabled features that are on by default because actually it improves performance.
There's another thing they did talk about yesterday, specifically to Central and tying it into AI, was they were going to look and say, if we did this thing, it could cause some pain, but you could have some gains. And they actually called the two windows pain and gain. To warn you, if we do this thing, we recommend it. And look at all of the gains you'll get. But they were honest enough to say, and this 1%, they're going to have they won't be able to connect. And they'll list out what those are. So I like the idea that they were using AI to look backwards, but also to predict, we know based on your current client load, this group is going to not be happy when they do turn.
And that's nice because usually that's buried in the release notes as like a gotcha or a note, like you should be aware of this thing that's but it doesn't say gonna bite you in the tuchus.
But specifically for your clients.
Yes, yeah. So it's even more.
There's a bunch of release notes that are
full. Yeah.
Do they care about me?
Yeah.
You go, oh yes, I do happen to have these old zebras that I have. So my warning is for me, not just generic.
And that's like light years ahead of where we were when you had to read the release notes with a highlighter and go, is this me? Is this not me? Is this me? And
am I on this code revision? I got to go check.
Yeah.
And well, I mean, I turned off my low data rates in my house because you all told me I needed to. And then my kid's Xbox stopped working. I was like, oh yeah, well, oh yeah, hey, it worked great until he made me actually go fix an SSID to make it work. But that's one of the things that we have to have those caveats of, yes, for 98% of the world, this will work. And that was one of the things they talked about, like statistical anomalies, right? Statistically speaking, anomalies are actually really rare. That's how statistics work. Most of the time, these things can be enabled, and you will never even know, except for that 1% that it does matter to. When all of a sudden, like you said, you're turning on a feature that's not standardized yet, or we've baked this one almost all the way, except in this one healthcare environment where it suddenly causes all kinds of problems. But like that's the feedback that they need, because as anyone who's done software testing will tell you, it worked fine on my laptop is not a test.
Yeah.
The test is I'm going to deploy it to 100,000 people, and if I get a 1% error rate, that's still 1,000 people who have a problem. So, I mean, are we getting to a point where we're going to have to start using more rigorous testing of these kinds of things to make sure that these features are bulletproof so that 1% error rate goes down to 0.1% error rate?
I think one of the things that's happening with this is that we have open loop control, right? So it's providing suggestions. We can decide what we want to do with that suggestion, but it takes away the problem of tribal knowledge. So like you said, you turned off the lower data rates because you were told to, based on best practice recommendations as generalizations of what we should do. Central's looking at real data and applying it in real time, say, hey, based on all the data that we've collected, we recommend this change because we've actually seen real benefit from this. It's not a myth that's kind of being handed down that these are best practices. It's based on real data that we can look at and do that statistical analysis.
Well, the next thing you're going to do is tell me that the institutional knowledge that I can design my Wi-Fi with solo cups is bad.
It can change over time, right? But it's real data to analyze if it is bad or not. And maybe they've made changes to it. It is actually better.
Oh, Peter and then Mark.
I think that's right. And I think AI is perfectly placed to help with these things. And it can do all that we want. But some of it's about the data that goes into it. So I think, we've talked a lot about, well, it will improve 90% of your clients or it made them better. But what is the criteria? And this is, I think, something that's very important for how do they decide that this kind is better or not? What's the criteria? Is it that it's getting more speed? Is it that it's somehow using the spectrum more efficiently? Is it that it's just got a higher MCX rate? This will improve your clients, but how? And I think that's a really important question to ask. And that's not something I really got from their presentations. What were those criteria? What does better look like?
we kind of saw this yesterday, but going back to Mobility Field Day a month ago, Juniper talked about how Marvis is never wrong. 100%, right? Remember? We called them out on it. Like, really? We kind of got that yesterday. Well, it's never wrong. Statistically, you cannot say that.
Nothing is never wrong. You're just not asking it the right questions.
Yes.
Or you're not an exception handler programmer. It's like +1, square root of 9, weird Greek characters or whatever. Like we've seen the meme about it. But the fact is that being statistically certain is not always right. Yes. Even at what is it, 5 sigma confidence level for all you stat nerds out there, leave a comment, 5 sigma. That's still like, there's still like a, what is it, like a 0.001% chance that you could be wrong. That's still not always right, or in your case, never wrong. But we are approaching that level. You know, it's like, remember the old joke about 5 nines of uptime, and then it became 7 nines of uptime. And I think I saw somebody with 9 nines of uptime one time, and I just said, why don't you just write that it never goes down? Because even 5 nines of uptime is like, what, 38 seconds of downtime a year? Like that's one of the things. And notice that now that we have the cloud, that whole thing went away. I think within 3, 4, 5 years, this whole idea of AI never being wrong will just go away, and we'll just assume that all facts generated by an LLM are right, and we're not going to question them.
Yeah, I wanted to comment something that Mark just reminded me of. Mobility Field Day a while ago, we had Juniper, we also had Cisco, and Nick from Cisco gave a pretty decent presentation on this same issue with KVNR, and with their cloud data, they also have from Meraki a whole, millions of data points, and have found, we know if we turn this feature on, you will see this huge improvement. And then they look back at their data set and said, yep, 80% of people don't. So go back and look at the previous Mobility Field Days.
Yeah.
But we're seeing this consistently from Juniper and Cisco and Aruba, that we have data now that should help everyone make their networks better, even if you're not using their data.
So I'm going to throw out a radical suggestion here, because I'm the anarchist when it comes to networking and wireless. If you're going to see such a huge improvement in these numbers by enabling these features, why don't I just turn them on for you? If I can turn on this feature and cut the support calls that I'm getting from your environment by 50%, my bean counters are going to tell me that I should turn on this feature because it's going to save me money. Maybe not you, but where do we draw the line of the AI says this won't impact you and it will make everything better in your life, I'm just going to turn it on for you?
I think it's got to be an option of
Opt-in.
use case.
No, we're not talking about this, because as we've learned from the data, if it's opt-in, nobody does it.
I think that the correction comes down to is what's been improved. So you said it's reducing my support calls. If that's the criteria, then I'd probably say yes, turn it on by default. But that's not what any vendor judges better on.
No.
So what is better? And this is what, like Juniper actually, maybe because I know them the best, like they judge it on their capacity SLE. If they can improve their capacity SLE, that's what they judge as better. So they've got actually quite a defined thing of what better is. Now I might go, but knowing that allows me to then go, okay, that recommendation is going to improve this element, but actually I'm not bothered about that. I want to improve something else. So I need to know the criteria that a vendor defines better at.
Oh, sweet dear Peter. Is this the one part when I'm actually more cynical than Peter? Because you talk to the support people on the technical side. I've seen the business side, and I promise you that somewhere in the bowels of every company out there, there is a person that is literally tracking every person hour that it takes for support and wondering, if I can get this number below a certain threshold, I can cut staff, or I can have automated tools come online that will reduce that workload. And that means I hit my numbers at the end of the quarter and I get to make a boat payment.
But that's what they want. That's what we want. That's what they want. But that's not what these tools are doing yet. And if they can do that, then maybe you'll say, yes, I'll have it all.
Hey, we just unlocked the real promise of AI.
Then they need feedback into their software from the ticketing system, and they need to sit there and go, when we make this change, support tickets go down. That's a good change. When we made this change, they go up. But that's not the success criteria today.
Yeah, Nick's example from Cisco was turn on AIR11R and you'll have faster roams. So his metric was, what's our average roam time? we can make that average roam time go down, which improves the customer experience. Has nothing to do with business model, but then again, that's not his job.
And look, I'll be the first person to tell you that as a purist nerd, the best technical solution for the problem is the one that we should implement. Faster roams, better SLA metrics. These all make my technical little heart happy. But unfortunately, even though I'm not wearing a tie, imagine there's a virtual tie here. That's not what people who wear ties care about. They care about one thing, and it has a dollar sign or a euro sign or a lira sign or whatever denomination of currency you're using, because at the end of the day, if it costs them money, they don't want to do it. If it makes them money, they absolutely want to do it. And that's how a lot of these features are judged. AI is not changing the world because it's a radical way to rethink development. AI is changing the world because it's going to make somebody money.
Speaking of the people with ties, you could leverage the scenario where you have your employees saying, hey, we should do this change, we can implement this policy or feature. But the ties don't want to allow that decision. You bring in a consultant who echoes what the employees were saying, and because the consultant said it, it gets done. Well, if AI starts singing the same song I'm singing, maybe I can leverage it and convince the people with ties, well, AI said it, that's why we need to do it. And then we can implement.
People listen to consultants because consultants are plausible deniability. If I do something and it screws up, then it wasn't my employees that did it. I don't have to fire them. It was this idiot that I hired, and it's just a sunk cost at that point. The question of whether or not people are going to listen to AI is whether or not I own the AI or I've paid somebody else to use the AI to make a recommendation.
And you said something really interesting, because it's about the money. So we can, as engineers, go, oh yeah, turn on 11 arcade makes you faster roam times, right? But actually, if roaming times weren't causing a problem on that network, then yes, AI said you'll get faster roam times. Yes, I've got faster roam times, but that wasn't causing anyone a problem or impacting anyone's user experience. I gain nothing from turning it on.
But it hasn't improved their user experience either. It hasn't impacted, but it hasn't improved.
Impacted it, but it hasn't. So, and I think that's why I keep coming back to success criteria. If we need to define what the success criteria is for making these changes.
Yeah, I was just going to comment, you know, we're talking about the ties, right, and some of those decisions, and I think in having AI automate some of these configuration changes, I think that there's definitely a risk portion there, right? I mean, because like all statistics might even say, yeah, this is a safe change, but you know, the one case where it's not, right, like, or it breaks something that's now all of a sudden with whatever, nurses aren't getting, you know, code blues to their phones because something happened, right? Then who ends up having to own that risk made by an AI that a manufacturer produces, right? It's like, I think it's an interesting challenge, right? It's sort of you see it like in the self-driving cars too. Does it hit a tree or does it hit the kid? You know, like
it's a really weird trolley problem.
Yeah.
All right, I actually want to move on to our next topic, because I mean we could probably sit here and do another hour on all of this stuff, and it would be fascinating viewing for the video audience at home. But let's get into some more nerdy stuff, because that's what people watch Field Day for. One of the things that we learned here at HPE Discover / Aruba Atmosphere is that there was a deployed Wi-Fi 7 network on premises. It involved deploying a lot of new APs, running some pre-production code, I guess would be a good way to put it. Fresh.
Daily, they just made.
Yes. The new nightly builds is my favorite term for we're pretty sure this is going to break something. But as we learned in the Wi-Fi 7 session, which was our second video that we recorded, there was a lot of stuff that they learned when they were doing this, and about client behavior and deploying features, and should we do this in the middle of a keynote. But I remember being in an Aruba Atmosphere keynote where they just failed over half the APs in the building and shut half of them down on a lark to prove that they could do it. And this time, it was a bit of a different experience. What is it that we say? Results were not entirely what we expected.
But I'm just proud of them for trying. Mm-hmm. It's a gutsy move to run on fresh code with brand new hardware. But on the flip side, where else you can get multiple thousands of BYOD clients all hitting your network? I mean, They have Aruba has a very nice testing facility, but they had way more BYOD stuff.
Well, and the other thing that I'll say here also is that when we talked to Madani about it, he literally said it is tradition at Aruba Atmosphere to run the freshest code that we can to get results we can't get anywhere else, because he did get pushback. They're like, you're going to run stuff we haven't tested on a network full of our customers? And they're like, yeah, doesn't everybody? But I mean, like Keith said, I applaud them for trying to do that, because they, there's no better way to have proof in the pudding. Now, I don't know that we ever got any numbers on how many Wi-Fi 7 clients that they've seen. Oh,
So during the general session, they gave us a number.
okay,
5% of clients were Wi-Fi 7
5%.
during the general session.
Out of
Interesting.
14,000.
Out of 14.
Yeah.
Well, no, that's the whole con.
That-
This is just everybody at the general session, which is not the entire con. So
6K or something.
roughly, who knows?
But still, they did have Wi-Fi 7s, and one thing I also want to applaud them. They had a PassPoint network with your AT&T or T-Mobile credentials. You just got on.
Yeah.
Zero headache. It just worked. I wished my MacBook had an AT&T SIM. It was like would have made life easier.
I can put that feature request in with Tim, and we'll see if we get that done for you.
Sure,
But
right over the
next WWDC.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, it's one of the things, because we've talked about this, we got a pre-production kind of pre-event launch of the Wi-Fi 7 technology. And, these APs are pretty awesome. I mean, one of the things they talked about was using a barometer in them to get a specific elevation fix, which is kind of a novel idea, because I can remember the idea of when people were putting barometers in cell phones and going, this is dumb. Why would anybody ever do this? Well, turns out there's actually good reasons for
And your
doing that.
watch too.
Yeah, it is, because it tracks elevation, and it'll also track atmospheric pressure and a bunch of other stuff. But people just assume that GPS was the best way to solve a problem, without realizing that GPS is really great for X, Y. Z it has a problem with, because, well, you're stacked on top of a building that has a roof and windows, and you're not outside moving around very much. So are we starting to see a point where the novel use of technology inside of these access points is making them, in a way, heavier edge computing platforms than historically? Because I can remember a time when it was just put a radio on there and we'll run all the intelligence back at a controller somewhere.
They specifically, during our session yesterday on Wi-Fi 7, were focused on, why do we just make a new AP just because it has a higher number? Yeah, we might sell some, but we should have better reasoning. They have 2 IoT radios inside, so they can do multiple things. They have 2 USB ports. They have added the barometer. They added location. They've added AZ on top of just MC. So they're doing additional things. And they didn't use the word MLO once yesterday.
I know you were really happy about that.
Very happy that
I want to say that was probably the thing that's impressed me the most, actually, was actually hearing about the 730 series APs, because they didn't really talk about Wi-Fi 7. It feels like what they've done is gone, let's make what do businesses and organizations need from a new AP? And Wi-Fi 7 is almost a secondary feature. And I actually was really impressed with that. Now, I know a lot of the stuff they've put in there, I think, is yet to be realized, what we can do with it. I like the fact that they talk about being able to put containers on the AP and run applications. And I like the fact that, I really like that Bluetooth 5.4. It's a technology I've looked at for years ago and thought, this is really cool location technology that no one's using, but they've added it to the AP, and I really applaud that.
So I do agree with the idea of deploying functionality before it's ready to be consumed, so that it can just be enabled through Aruba Central and things like that. There's actually a really concrete example of this, courtesy of our friends in Cupertino. The HomePod Mini has a humidity sensor in it. Nobody knew about this humidity sensor when it shipped, because they never said it was in there. And then one day they pushed an update to the HomePod Mini and said, now we can do humidity sensing in the rooms that these are in. And everyone went, what? Like it's in there? And they're like, well, yeah, we just didn't tell you about it because it wasn't ready to go live yet. And so that's one of the things that Aruba can do with these 730 APs. Yes, as Peter mentioned, you can buy them for all of their advanced new features and all their barometers and all this other stuff. Maybe Wi-Fi 7 isn't your use case now, but in 2 years when you're ready to consume it, because all of your client devices have Wi-Fi 7 radios, then you can go into the stakeholder, the tie wearer offices and go, we're ready to turn it on now. And they're like, well, I was told in this magazine article that it won't be ready for another year and we have to buy new hardware. And you're like, no, we already bought it. In fact, it's on now. And they're happy because they have the ability to, get their email downloaded faster, or they don't cut out on their Zoom call when they're walking around their office or something like that. But it's a risk that a lot of companies take, because when you build that hardware into a platform, you're assuming cost of goods sold in that device. And if you can't sell it because people would rather spend less money on a slightly less advanced device to deploy more of them or to just save money on their bottom line, you could potentially put the company in a tight spot because you're not hitting your numbers. So do you think that Aruba will have a bigger demand for the 730 APs, knowing that Wi-Fi 7 may not be the driver for it?
So Madani made an interesting comment that their go-to-market strategy is to position it as more than just the Wi-Fi 7 AP, but then he acknowledged that they didn't recognize that the consumer mindset, 7's bigger than 6.
Mm-hmm.
And that alone is driving a lot of their sales. And with it being the only Wi-Fi 7 at the moment AP that they have, a lot of consumers will start purchasing it.
Yeah.
And then he also made another comment that they wanted to include a lot of future-proofing in, and they wanted to set customers up for 10-year life cycles, which is kind of interesting. It's a good story now to ease their concerns about making the financial investment and then hoping they'll refresh in 3 years. But if they don't refresh and they do go to a 10-year life cycle, now are they shortchanging themselves out of 3 refresh cycles and losing money down the road that can impact their bottom line?
I think there's a couple pieces to that too, right? I think I look at my customer base, and I feel like a lot of them have waited, have kind of sat with, didn't jump to 6E or something in a lot of cases, and so I do think there's probably some opportunity to just make that refresh. Eventually, everyone's gonna have to refresh, right? So picking that point in time and going from year 5 to year 7 seems to make sense from a timing standpoint, right? But there are also some choices that Aruba made around the operating systems and how some of these new APs were supported that I think also kind of lended itself to that, right? Like AOS 10 only is an option, right? Versus like 8 and 10 or something. I think there's some choices there that made some of the adoption a little different. And I think as those other supporting technologies are continuing to mature, it'll make it a little bit easier to, I think, adopt the Wi-Fi 7 APs.
And I think that that's an important point that people need to understand, is that it's not just hardware protocol support, it's software support. And one of the problems that we run into a lot of times is finding people to write patches and code fixes for older platforms. As much as I would love to keep still using my iPhone 3GS, the hardware is so out of date that nobody can write for it anymore. So if you want to run the latest, greatest operating system, sorry guys, you can't be on a 3GS anymore. And we've seen that. I've heard stories in the last couple of months about, government contracts. Why on earth do you still make that piece of hardware? Because the Department of Defense says that we need to support it for 20 years, and we're going to make it for 20 years. And now we're talking about the cutting edge, like Troy said, people want to go buy whatever's the biggest and the best and the fastest, and the number is the highest. And there's a reason why pro phones outsell non-pro phones, is because pro means bigger, faster, better, and more expensive. And people will buy that even if they don't use a 10th of the features on it, because I want to have the biggest, baddest, fastest, best. And right or wrong, the people that wear ties love to brag about their stuff, unless they're in an environment where they're not allowed to brag about it. But I promise you, there's a CEO or two on that floor right now who's walking around going, well, my people just deployed this Aruba 7 something thing, and it is fast. I can't even tell you how fast it is because they've never used it. But that's a point of contention. And like you said, it may be the fastest now, but what happens when 7E comes out, or 7 Plus, or whatever we're going to call the next revision?
They did also talk about the new Wi-Fi 7 APs having 5 gig Ethernet as that lead into the future, because not a lot of companies rev their cycles for their wire side and their wireless side at the same time. And so they're purposely saying, we'll put these out. You might not have the support at your edge yet, but it will keep you from needing to rev them sooner.
Yeah.
So that it gives you a little longer life cycle. And I appreciate, I would rather have a longer life cycle. I'm sure most customers would, rather than I'm expected every 3 years. That's a pretty expensive.
I think the pandemic actually shattered that idea of the 3 to 4 year life cycle of a device and constantly, because on the consumer side, everybody has to have a new phone every year, whether or not you actually need one, because there's features coming out or because it's shinier or it's made out of platinum or whatever it is this year. But ultimately in the enterprise, we see people holding things for longer to depreciate them over a longer timeline. But also, when half of your employees work remotely, does your office IT equipment really need to be revved that often? And that's one of the problems that access point manufacturers are going to find themselves in, is if people aren't in the office anymore, do I really need to rev these APs to the hottest, fastest 7+ mega ultra, or can I just get away with this for another 6 or 7 months until it's time to rev my switches?
Right. I mean, we still have customers out there that, you know, have never even sort of, it was built once upon a time for like a 2.4 gigahertz network and has never been redesigned physically because the cost of doing the cable footprint to support a denser design is so cost prohibitive in an existing building that they just don't do it. And so like it's hard to take advantage of some of those features, you know, and like they really have to bite the bullet on a multi-million-dollar like cabling project to catch up sometimes. And that's
Wi-Fi 4 for life.
That's right.
But I think that's why it's sensible to have a focus on some of these IoT technologies and the other things going into the APs, because yeah, half of my staff are not in the office anymore. I don't need faster speeds and higher throughput, but actually, if I can utilize an IoT sensor in there to know when people are sat at what desks and to help hot desking, which we've moved to because not everyone doesn't need a desk, and I can, and my APs can actually give some of that functionality. Well, actually, that might be a reason for me to refresh.
And things like building controls. Well, now that my building's half empty, I don't need to run the air handlers nearly as much. Or occupancy sensors. Hey, there's nobody in the building on Tuesdays anymore, so we'll just power everything down as much as possible. And that was one of the things I talked about, was that APs can go into a deep sleep mode, so they're not just idling, they're off until they are needed. And that's one of the things that a lot of companies have started talking about more, is this transition into using greener, more sustainable technology, because as it turns out, shutting down a whole bunch of stuff for about 8 months in 2020 showed, one, that we don't need offices, but more importantly, when we're all working from home, the load on the environment is significantly lessened. Well, we're not flying around everywhere and we're not driving everywhere. And I mean, other than the fact we're baking a lot more sourdough bread, I mean, that's the only thing we're contributing to the atmosphere. So, are we going to find ourselves in a situation where the usage patterns of these devices are going to change to things like IoT, basically a half full building full of more sensors than people, giving us data that we can use AI to analyze and prioritize and things like that?
One of the things they added in these new devices was 2 USB ports plus 2 IoT radios. But those 2 USB ports can drive up to 10 watts. So you take that cable plant you've already got, and now you upgrade your switches with enough PoE power. Not only can you drive this new AP, but you can drive IoT sensors off that same pole. That's giving you IP access to the edge with power off of a cable plant you've already got.
I agree. I think these features are going to become more important. I've said it for a while now, but I think IoT, sensors, building controls, the environmental factor is massive. I don't know, at least I know in the UK where I come from, there's all sorts of government initiatives to become net zero and reduce power, and there's incentives, government incentives for companies to show that they're doing something. And it's going to start to get into legislation, I think, soon as well. So I think companies are starting to take it seriously, how much power they're using, and I think that'll become a big driver. So if you can buy greener products, that'll become a benefit, I think.
Well, as you can see, there's a lot of discussion around everything that happens at Aruba Atmosphere and HPE Discover. There's a lot of exciting technologies that we're going to be investigating well into the future. And as you may have heard in this roundtable, there's a lot of great content that we recorded here that we referenced, some wonderful technical presentations from a lot of folks. So make sure you check that out on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/techfieldday. And make sure you stay tuned for more great content coming from all of our Field Day events throughout the remainder of the year. You can find the most up-to-date list at techfieldday.com. And you can follow us on LinkedIn, you can follow us on Mastodon, you can follow us on Twitter. Just go to techfieldday.com and you can find all the ways to connect with us. For all of our amazing delegates here from HP Discover and Aruba Atmosphere, for our wonderful audience out there, thank you very much for tuning in. We can't wait to hear your thoughts on this video as well as all the other content that we recorded here. Make sure you leave a comment and follow us for more.